știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, отдых и на труд. Страна моя родная, поколение, поколение, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой зависит черный, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой зависит черный. Над страной весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, поколение, поколение, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой зависит черный, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой зависит черный. оклад. И нас не согреет треск речей под барабанный раскат. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы извинить, и что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rein ein in der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Pod słońcem rasti jasna dzieci, rasti i cvietaj zemljoradnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti пустяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 14th of February 2026, and be sure to hold those you love close tonight because it's going to be a wild ride. We are currently coming to you live on YouTube and on X and on Rumble and on Twitch. So if you haven't subscribed to all the relevant platforms, then be sure to do so. We are currently going to be looking at various different points over the next hour or so. Maybe we'll go a little bit longer, depending upon what's required. So, yes, be sure to subscribe to us on all platforms. If you haven't done so, always be sure to follow us on the various different alternative platforms that we have, including, of course, Rumble and Twitch. because you never know when the overlords of Google have decided that they are going to crush us mercilessly. Hasn't happened yet, but it's surely only a matter of time. So, hello to all those of you who are in the chat. We'll go through some comments later, but first of all, let's just do a few greetings. So, hello to Ben Horse from Toronto, Ash from down there on the other side of the globe in Australia. Hello to Walter Stolzing. Hello to Baum from Bolivia. Good to have you with us. Here's President Jesus from California. Hello, Comrade Marius. Hello, Irish Partisan. Hello, Speedy Bozo. Bruce Albert. Davey from the wild west of Wales. Wild northwest of Wales, in fact. Hello to Bob Parr, who says, good morning from the US vassal state of Australia, where our defense minister works in every meeting to increase troop numbers here, and whose parliamentary office is lined with US landmark photos. I mean, that's just fucking sad. This is the thing I find particularly disgusting with the figures who are like militantly pro-US in the Five Eyes countries, and more broadly in Europe and the entire imperialist bloc. These people all end up, of course, trading their own cultures and nations in for the US's culture, and they end up worshipping US cultural figures, US entertainment products. They end up pretending to like things like the NFL. They end up becoming basically James Corden, which is a fate worse than death. Hello to Defiant. Hello to Nikolai from Switzerland. Miguel from Portugal. ScoMo, hello to you. What's the song that starts at the 4-minute mark? I'd have to go back over the song list and look at it. There is a Croatian communist song on there, as Defiance 856 has worked out. I found that on an abandoned YouTube channel that was filled with old Titoite songs from the 60s, some of which are quite catchy, I must admit. Titoite revisionism did have some good tunes. Sadly, it had utterly terrible politics, but there you go. Hello to Johnny Funders, probably not the Johnny Funders, I don't think, but a good name nonetheless. Hello to ACDT, Cataclysm 123 from Blackburn, the 4,000 Holes fame, of Beatles lyric fame. Hello to Valerie Morris. Hello to Richard Madden. Hello to Spiral Alice from the west of Ireland. Hello to Whale Bath 79, great name. Hello to Terry Brown and Paul, also in the wild northwest of Wales. Hello to Comrade Ian Foster. Hello to Yellow Sheep and Why I Ain't Cool. Svetlana Simon and Oscar greets us from Sydney, Australia. Hello to Bruce Albert. Hello to Alex Moore. Bruce says, Cuba situation with fuel not good. Venezuela and Mexico have stopped deliveries. Looks like being like an escorted convoy from Russia is being organized. What about China and its rather large fleet? Makes me think that Jyoti's dad was correct. Well, the Chinese are not producers of oil, are they? They're importers of oil. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. They import huge quantities of oil from Russia and Iran. So, yes, they could, of course, reprocess some, stick it in fleets and send it, but easier for the Russians to do it direct from source. An escorted convoy from the Russian Federation will get through. If the Americans try and do an armed interception on that, that's an act of war. Now, of course, the French and various others have been running around the globe trying to hunt down the so-called shadow fleet. But all this means is that what will ultimately have to happen is that the Russians and others as well who want to make sure that their shipping remains safe is that they'll have to stop using flags of convenience, and they'll have to escort their tanker fleets with naval assets to stop the US essentially committing acts of piracy. Because the US won't dare to actually intercept an escorted convoy because they simply don't have the means to fight a war against a major opponent. That's why they're dithering and hesitating and doing all kinds of vacillations over Iran, because they can't fight Iran directly. They've got to use other methods to do so. There was an interesting story that came out from Veritz. It was one of the pro-Iranian Twitter accounts I follow I think the name is Arya or something. I forget the precise title. But it was now being said by official sources in Iran that the plan when those riots were happening was to have an uprising seize control of one of the key cities in Iran, not Tehran, but one of the smaller ones, and declare an alternative government there. This never happened. So it's clear that the plan that the imperialists had for Iran involved them triggering some kind of uprising that was ultimately successful, maybe gaining several defections from the Iranian military, and none of that actually materialized. So again, the imperialists can't fight Iran toe to toe. It wouldn't work. They wouldn't win, and so they have to resort to other methods. So that's why I say the Russians do an armed escort of an oil convoy into Cuba. The Americans won't dare hijack it. They'll then try all kinds of other things. And there are, the more research you do into how other countries are supporting Cuba, the more you see that things are being done. Like the Vietnamese, for instance, are assisting them with becoming self-sustaining with regard to food production. But it's the Russians who are the big ones when it comes to oil. If they supply oil in large quantities directly to Cuba, then the US blockade will evaporate and Trump will have to scuttle away again. Hello to Alex Moore, Nikki, really bad person. Thank you very much for the suggestion. Like the damn stream. Indeed, you should. Hello to Mohammed Kaira. Hello to you. Hello to Jenny, our moderator. And Defiance asks, when do you think the Chinese will stop being observers to take a more active role in international affairs? Well, I think that they are. I mean, the things like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, these aren't passive things. Like, there's a reason why the US intimidates or tries to intimidate anybody that joins the Belt and Road Initiative. There's a reason why the US and the British are constantly working to gain more influence in Central Asia. They're working to undermine the Chinese initiatives. The Chinese are doing all kinds of things. I mean, to be completely honest, they're doing all kinds of very impressive things in some of the African nations. They are they're trying to, I mean, they don't have a lot of oil of their own, but they are trying to boost Cuba's energy supply with renewables, which they're some of the leading producers in the world of renewables, and I think it's now they've got Cuba's energy grid up to 20% on solar power. Doesn't do all the things that Cuba needs, but it's a step forward. So to say that they're not doing anything, I think he's incorrect. What they're not doing is they're not doing the kind of things that the Russians are doing right now, which is they're directly in a fight with a proxy force of imperialism in Ukraine. Now, could they do more for nations like Cuba? Well, maybe, but we don't know all the things that they're doing at the moment. So I would say that it's not. A lot of people in the West want the Chinese to behave as if this was like the early years of the Soviet Union, and we could get the Comintern back. And that's not where we are at the moment. But I would say judge the Chinese actions by imperialism's response to them. And the imperialists' response to Belt and Road Initiative, to Chinese initiatives in the African nations, is to try and undermine them by as violent a means as possible. And that the Chinese do offer alternative ways of development to revolutionary governments that come to power, such as the Sahel governments, as do the Russians, as do the Iranians to some extent. So the Chinese role in the world is to act as a support system for radical governments that do come to power, because they will do business with them, whereas of course the US will try and strangle the life out of them. So I would say that there's plenty the Chinese are doing. It's not just but it's not the kind of spectacular looking stuff that people look for. And ultimately, the Chinese model does provide an existential threat to US imperialism, because it provides the entire world with alternative paths of development. which again is why US imperialism is thrashing around trying to find ways to destroy the People's Republic of China. Now, I have gone into at great length the problems that the Chinese have. I would say that the book by the aforementioned Harpal Bra, is very much compulsory reading, as he went through in that a lot of the problems that have been produced by the reform and opening up, and the Chinese themselves are aware of the problems, some of the problems that have been produced by the reform and opening up period. So the other point I would make is that you see a lot of people saying, "Oh, China isn't socialist. China isn't socialist." The Chinese themselves don't claim that they've reached socialism yet. I mean, better that their rather more sober approach than the ridiculous approach of a Khrushchev, who would claim that the Soviet Union had reached socialism about 8 times, or Brezhnev's developed socialism deception. Chinese are, if you read the works of Xi Jinping, say that they aim for a moderately prosperous society, socialist society, by the 100th anniversary, I think, of the Chinese Revolution, which again shows a rather more sober approach than others. And so, to bring this to a conclusion, I think that the fact that what goes wrong with the Chinese approach, I think, is that, and here's where I will draw on criticisms that were made of Deng Xiaoping by the Cultural Revolutionaries, is that it is too economically deterministic. They do think, they do seem to think anyway, that if they can reach a level of economic power that outstrips the United States, that the world will, well, if not fall into line behind them, I think that's the wrong way to put it, but the world will adjust itself and will do so to orient around multiple poles of power, and power will become more democratized in the global system. Now, I think what the Chinese leadership, over certainly before Xi and certainly maybe before 2018-19, what they underestimated was the ruthlessness and the savagery of imperialism when it came to trying to destroy the Chinese system. I think that the leadership in China were finally disabused of these illusions after the Hong Kong events in 2018-19 and early 2020. And also, I think COVID played a role in this as well, given that the considered opinion of the Chinese leaders seems to be that this was something that was cooked up by the US and unleashed on them in order to try and destroy, again, the foundations of the People's Republic, just as the Hong Kong situation was a manipulation by Anglo-American intelligence services and their collaborators on the ground, like Jimmy fucking Lai. So the way in which I would see this is that the Chinese are proceeding in a quieter fashion, but again, just look at the frenzied nature of US imperialism's like contortions around China, and the fact that the US imperialists are caught, as Elvis Presley once said, in a trap, and they can't walk out of it, which is that they themselves ended up dependent upon the Chinese, and still are, for myriad commodities, including the commodities that are sold on the shelves in the Walmarts of the United States. And without those cheaper Chinese goods, social control in the United States will become increasingly hard, you know? So the Chinese method, for all that I have criticisms of it, has put the imperialists in a very, very difficult situation. And also, I would say that the Chinese divestment from dollars isn't nothing either. Like, the Chinese made a calculation in 2008. One can disagree with it, but it is their calculation to make, that they would essentially bail out the US when it came to the crash of 2008, because it was clearly judged by the Chinese leaders that it was in their interests to keep the US market open and not to have it go down in flames. And so they bought a lot of dollars and continued to, but now they're not. Now they're divesting of them, and that's another reason why Trump is flailing around, making threats, throwing tariffs at the Chinese, which all of which the way, have completely failed. Biden was trying to cut the Chinese off from to have the Chinese leadership declare that it was a national priority to build their own, and they succeeded in building their own. So nothing the Americans have done has worked, but now they're moving towards trying to create like another version of the Ukraine war in Taiwan. A little bit more difficult to do that given that there's no land border, but it doesn't mean they're not going to try. So I'd say don't underestimate what the Chinese are doing. Don't overstate it either. This is the problem with a lot of like Western China fanboys, is that they whilst one has to state openly and defend the tremendous achievements of the Chinese Revolution, one should never become just a cheerleader. One should always take a realistic attitude towards what they're doing, and that includes the positive side and the negative side as well. So, okay, well, we're going to begin the analysis for the evening then. We're going to check in first with our friends who are wrapped up in the Epstein scandal. Now, you may have seen the U.S. Attorney General, a certain Pamela Bondi, who looks like the sort of physical embodiment of Florida, make a complete fool of herself before a congressional committee the other day when asked about her department's inaction over the Epstein case. She started ranting about how the Dow was at 50,000, which, by the way, is no boast given how completely disconnected the stock market values are from the real productive capacity in the U.S. economy. But that's another issue. And she went through all kinds of verbal histrionics to try and evade answering questions. According to the Congressman Thomas Massey, who's one of the two who has been sort of taking a lead on this, Bondi came into the hearing with cue cards with insults written on them. So this is the approach that she was going to use, was basically to ape her boss, which is to try and derail the awkward questions, try and turn the hearing into like a row that didn't produce any useful material, try and avoid at all costs actually having to answer a serious question. And that, again, is a deliberate tactic because the Trump administration is sinking bit by bit in the Epstein scandal. Now, as Massey correctly pointed out, it's not just Trump. I mean, Trump is guilty as sin by his own admission of various different things that some of which involved Epstein, some of which did not. But it's not his scandal alone. He takes his place in a line of those who have covered this up, arguably starting with George W. Bush, but I would argue going all the way back to Reagan, given that the first reported complaints about Epstein, again, these were just complaints, came in the 80s. But Epstein, of course, remained a key intelligence asset of probably multiple intelligence agencies, certainly Mossad, certainly the CIA, maybe others. Let's just call him an intelligence asset for the Five Eyes system plus Western Europe and Israel. So he's a busy man, or certainly was a busy man. So the point about Bondi's performance is that this was designed to obscure everything. She ended up being revealed as being a liar, being confronted by various victims of Epstein, and will probably now be remembered for this. And it wouldn't surprise me if in the end, if Trump gets put under further pressure, he dumps Bondi and literally throws her under the bus to save himself, or trying to save himself. And so this has, again, produced an interesting online debate there are those who, of course, including myself amongst them in the past, would have denounced some of the things that the likes of Whitney Webb produced in terms of her research as conspiracy theories and what I would call the dull-witted and non-dialectical approach to understanding the capitalist state leaves many Western Marxists to say, but the capitalist state is run by the capitalists and they got everything they want out of the state anyway, so why would they need to engage in conspiracy-type cabals? Well, the answer to that is that the ruling class and their lackeys require places to meet that aren't in the public eye. They require places to scheme which aren't in the public eye. They require discussions to be had which can never be reported upon. Because even though they do run the capitalist state, the fact is that in the bourgeois democracies, there exists certain liberal freedoms which get in the way of efficient management. So the fact that the working class still has the vote gets in the way of efficient management, because even if the people in Congress or Parliament are complete stooges, the mere fact that the working class can vote for the ruling class represents a problem. The mere fact that there exists a certain amount of freedom of speech, but rapidly becoming more restricted, also creates problems. The fact that things can be reported upon, even in the bourgeois press, that are embarrassing also creates problems. So, and also bear in mind, the bourgeoisie can never come out and say what they actually need, the kind of things that they want to engage in, policy-wise, or maybe with other things as well. They can't come out and admit to that. So they need places to plot and scheme that are not in Parliament, that are not visible to the plebs, that are never reported on by the media. And they also need to make sure that their lackeys, like Keir Starmer, like Donald Trump, like Joe Biden, are all bound together towards one common purpose, and that they have so much dirt on their lackeys that none of them will ever turn on them. All of this means that they require organizations, and they require certain venues that can be used to meet in that aren't available, aren't accessible to the public, that aren't visible, that are never reported on, that where you can say and do just about anything and get away with it, where you can come up with all kinds of schemes and get away with it. And that's why Epstein networks exist. And Epstein's just one guy, remember. There'll be many others like him in every country running similar networks, running blackmail infrastructure, also running operations that help build cohesion amongst the ruling class and their political hirelings, because if you've committed horrible crimes together, you're more likely to stick with each other, or you'll either hang together or hang separately, basically. And so Epstein should be seen properly as the manipulator of one of these expressions of unofficial bourgeois power. And it's unofficial power where a lot of the big decisions are made. Then they come, when you see a government like Keir Starmer's government, or Emmanuel Macron's government, or Friedrich Merz's government, when you see a government get in, the chances are that all of the major decisions that government is going to make have already been discussed privately in one of these networks, like, for instance, the Council on Foreign Relations, like the Bilderberg Group, like Epstein's, the various denizens of Epstein's Island. These are all areas where the bourgeoisie and their intellectuals, to use the Gramscian version of that term, meet up and they plot and they scheme, and then they go to Parliament, and then they go to the presidential palace, and then they present what they're going to do. And particularly in the West, these off-the-record secret cabal-like meetings are absolutely necessary, because the US-led imperialist system is trying to manage like an entire 2 continents worth of countries. That requires a lot of planning and detailed discussion. It's why you have things like the World Economic Forum. That's there to, through its Global Young Leaders program, it's there to train people, the next generation of politicians, as to how to enact an agenda which ultimately comes out of the United States and Britain and France and Germany to an extent as well, and how to enact that whilst in power. No surprise that that's where Justin Trudeau and Javier Milei, the clown, came from. So the conventional Western Marxist view of conspiracies, as Michael Parenti pointed out, is completely wrong. The capitalist class requires the ability to conspire, because all the things that their class requires from the state can't be discussed out in the open, as the Epstein revelations quite clearly show. And so the other thing to mention here is, of course, the damage done in Britain itself, the end of the miserable career of Peter Mandelson, the compromising of Keir Starmer's government to a terminal degree, the fact that that government will go down in flames with Starmer himself, and nothing that they can do is going to make any difference. Now, speaking of that, the next phase on this, it looks like that this story is going to continue to run and run. There may be even more releases ultimately from the US side, which will only serve to damage further the system, which is already in a crisis. Certainly, in the British system has a deep crisis being expressed in it through every single day now. Now, the British crisis here is what we'll turn to next, and this is, of course, underlined by the fact that the most recent economic data is absolutely woeful. Now, in the fourth quarter of 2025, the British economy grew by 0.1%. Total 2025 growth was 1.3%. The productivity growth in the last year is 0.4%, and unemployment runs at least 5.1%. None of these are good indicators. To give an indication of like what else has happened, since 1997, you've seen a further deindustrialization of Britain. So manufacturing represented 21% of British GDP in 1997. In the latest figures from 2022, it's down to 13.1%. So there's even more financialization carried on under the Labour government of Blair and Brown. There's also a productivity collapse. There's many more firms going bankrupt now, but there's still no new investment. British capitalist class has been ridiculously backward on investment for nearly 20 years now, since the 2008 crash. Britain has one of the lowest investment levels in the West. The US isn't much better. The only reason the US looks a little bit better is that so much has been going into the tech bubble. There's also a trap that the British ruling class and their political servants have found themselves in. They can't go forward and can't go backwards. They can't announce like vast Keynesian style spending, because that will cause a collapse in investor confidence in the British pound. But they can't just go back to pure austerity either, because that would be political suicide for anybody who tries it, even Nigel Farage, if he gets in. So this is like the yields on British bonds have gone up recently, which of course shows that the investor class is losing confidence in the British government. So we have a complete stagnation of the British economy. We have massive deindustrialization. We have massive amounts of debt. We have record increasing numbers of bankruptcies, very low productivity, very low investment. When you put all that together with the highest unemployment levels outside of the pandemic, well, you have a perfect storm of, I think the technical term is bullshit. So the excuses given by the Labour government and the Labour finance minister Rachel Reeves that, oh well, we're doing better than we have done over the last 7 years. Well, yes, but the last 7 years were absolutely awful. I mean, this is like the old proverbial dead cat bounce. The dead cat hits the floor and bounces once, but it doesn't mean that the cat is still alive. So this is what, and also the collapse in the faith in the Labour Party, of course, is easily explained if one has a Leninist point of view, which is that social democracy is built on, its source of legitimacy is being able to deliver reforms. If it can't deliver reforms, then what's the point of social democracy? Nothing. Nobody wants reformism without reforms. So this is why they become so unpopular and collapse so quickly. Now, moving to other issues, and here I will turn back to the United States, which is that the one issue, and I mean, again, this draws from our discussion that we were having earlier about the Chinese threat as the U.S. bourgeoisie see it, and one of the biggest threats is the fact that the Chinese are outperforming, of course, the US in all forms of commodity production, including areas that the US like to think it was still ahead on, such as car production. Now, in the Wall Street Journal last week, there was a rather frank article written about the fact that the US car makers, those who are producing or trying to produce large amounts of electronic vehicles, are making gigantic losses on electronic vehicle production. So, for instance, Stellantis is halting most electronic vehicle production, having made losses in the last year, and last year 26 billion. Ford have announced losses of 19.5 billion. General Motors 6 billion, and the Volkswagen Group, which is of course mainly German, 6 billion. So that's a $50 billion worth of write-downs of losses on electronic vehicle production. Now, the problem here is that one of the problems anyway is that the governments started to mandate transitions to electronic vehicles, but there was the demand from the consumer base just simply wasn't there quite a lot of the time, because electronic vehicles are still in the West very, very expensive to produce, expensive to buy, and difficult to maintain. And so they mandated a rollout of electronic vehicle transitions. But again, there was still no demand from the consumer base, so it led to a crisis. There was now, thanks to the fact that they've wildly overestimated how much take-up there would be of electronic vehicles, this represents now a giant case of capital misallocation. So there's billions that have been spent by the car companies in the United States and Europe on battery plants, and making it very difficult to produce batteries for electronic vehicles, retooling production lines, and research and development. Now they're making losses of $50 billion plus. That seems like a giant misallocation of resources. So as I said earlier, the consumers in the West are rejecting the US and European made electronic vehicles, and they don't have the purchase that the governments and the executives thought they would have. Because again, too expensive, too difficult to maintain. The fact that the software that runs electronic vehicle is not controlled by you. The fact that somebody can remotely switch off your car. Well, none of these make them appealing prospects. Now, Trump is reversing the electronic vehicle mandate, which will just lead to even more losses. So the electric car, the electronic vehicle, cannot succeed under the conditions of imperialism in the United States, or depending on which term you want to use, under the conditions of late capitalism. Producing electric cars is too expensive, and therefore the cost of them is prohibitive for most people. In order that these could be sold in the numbers that would be needed to make a profit, the state would have to step in and essentially subsidize the sales of electric vehicles even more than they are already. Now you compare that to ultimately what's happening in China, where you've got a mass take-up of electric vehicles because these are built much more affordably and are built at a scale which is able to be sustained. Now so now you've got a massive overinvestment and overproduction of unaffordable electronic vehicles in the West, which looks like it could plunge the US and Europe, some of the European car companies, into a further crisis. It's also worth saying that for all that the Chinese have got significant market elements in their economy, the fact is that they still do plan their investments out far more than the anarchy of production in the West does, which is also worth bearing in mind. The other thing of note is that one of the things that the Canadians were discussing with the Chinese was lifting tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, which, again, if you actually sold Chinese electric vehicles in a big way in Western countries and sold them at considerably cheaper prices, then people might take them up. But as it stands, like the ones produced in the West are just too expensive for even fairly middle class people to get to obtain. Now, we'll probably come back to this because when companies make that much of a loss, we'll have to follow up on like what happens because of that loss. Because again, very interesting to actually monitor them. Now, the other thing I wanted to cover was this school shooting in Canada, the Tumbler Ridge massacre. Now, this was done by the perpetrator here was a man by the name of Jesse van Rootselaar, which sounds like a South African name or a Boer name. But this guy was an 18-year-old guy who, of course, was disturbed. He had been he claimed to be actually a woman. In fact, he's intercepted online posts claimed he was a lesbian trapped in a man's body, which is what that globulous old fraud Eddie Izzard used to say. Now, Rootselaar gunned down 8 people. So 8 killed, 6 children ages 11 to 13, 1 teacher, and his own mother with a rifle and a modified handgun. He then apparently committed suicide. Now, this is obviously a horrifying event, but it is interesting in the context of the continued growth of school shootings, both in the imperial core, right in the center, which is in the US, but increasingly in other countries as well. Now, Canada, of course, has not exactly lax gun laws, but guns are available in Canada, shall we say, in a way that they're not really in this country. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about this that I wanted to point out. The first thing is that according to research done by those who can rapidly accumulate data on Rootselaar's online activity, Rootselaar was apparently engaged in online gaming via the service known as Roblox, where there is a simulator on there where you can play at essentially doing mass shootings. So I'm indebted to this to a woman who goes under the name of BX on X, who writes about the online activities of mass shooters. So this guy was apparently going on this service to play at doing mass shootings. So the fact that this exists at all is disturbing in itself, but the fact that this exists and has a community around it is pretty horrifying. Now, I'd also point out that to actually kill someone, I mean, if you read psychological profiles of like what it takes to kill someone, even in a war situation, it takes a lot to kill somebody, mentally speaking. Like it takes like a sort of almost divorce from the self, or to be in a situation where it's either like kill or be killed. So that's how soldiers are trained to respond. It's you are given training to break down your inherent moral inhibitors and your fear and your desire not to hurt people, and you're trained to be able to actually shoot to kill. But a lot of the time, of course, the soldier can tell themselves that it's kill or be killed. Now, for a regular person to actually go out, first of all, shoot their own mother, and then shoot a bunch of children, that takes a lot of craziness to do that. Takes a lot of like takes a lot of breaking down of the psyche in order to do that, which raises an interesting question about these mass shooters, because again, these killing unarmed children psychologically is not an easy thing to do. So it raises an interesting question as to how does somebody get to that point. Now, he apparently, Rootselaar, drew some inspiration from the woman who claims to be a man who carried out a mass shooting in a school just over a year ago, who actually did have a manifesto, but as far as I'm aware, it has never been publicized. My guess why is because it probably contains a load of like rambling, incoherent nonsense, but rambling, incoherent nonsense about a transgenocide that, of course, many prominent politicians in the United States have engaged in. That'll be why it hasn't been published yet. Now, as I said, Rutzler had been on drugs to transition him since he was 12 years old. Now, I should say as a disclaimer, not everybody who gets that inflicted upon them will become a mass shooter. But if this guy was severely unwell anyway, being pumped full of these drugs wouldn't have aided the situation. Now, there is another point here, which is that, and this is something that this woman who calls herself BX on Twitter makes, is that there are constant speculations that there are other forces involved in this so-called online radicalization of mass shooters. Now, if you're familiar at all with the parlance of anti-terrorism operations, or the parlance of the censorship industrial complex, now what they often say is that, oh, such a person was radicalized online. Now, as always, one should take what these people say as an admission rather than something that is about things that they're looking to prevent. They are the ones, that is the Western intelligence services, law enforcement agencies, various other fascist and provocateur groups, ultimately under the control of the bourgeoisie. They are the ones who radicalize people online quite a lot of the time. And the reason, I mean, the fact that this Roblox derived game that Rutzler was apparently using, which enabled you to compete for the amount of unarmed people you could gun down. The fact that that exists and is allowed to exist in the West shows you just what a profoundly depraved place it really is. But more than that, there have been a number of shooters in the United States who were reported credibly to have had some kind of contact with somebody online who was working for a federal law enforcement agency. Now, again, there's several possible explanations for this. Either the FBI and others are spying on so many people and gathering so much information that they inevitably come into contact with some mass shooters, or there is another alternative, which is that somebody, for some reason, is looking to turn certain people into even more psychotic individuals than they are already, and push them down the route of becoming a mass school shooter. This seems to be, according to reports done by the woman who runs the BX Twitter account, according to like her Substack piece, there are certain organizations in the United States, cults, fascist organizations, satanic fascist organizations, who do seek to influence particularly young people with mental health problems into becoming mass killers. And this is where I'll say something about the readings I've been doing recently on the subject of Satanism. The tendency amongst Marxists is to say, well, who gives a shit? Satan's not real anyway. But I think that would miss the point. The fact is that Satanism represents an organizing pole for ultra-reactionary elements in the bourgeoisie. And here I am indebted to the work done by Twitter user RJ Moreau on X, who's did a lot of interesting reading and posting up of information on the likes of Aleister Crowley. If you know who Aleister Crowley is, there's two versions of him. There's the version that's sold to us in old Perfidious Albion, if you grow up here, which is that he was this sort of wild, sort of rich, eccentric guy who was a sort of cartoon Satanist who, he was sort of just basically a harmless eccentric. Then there's the version that actually existed, which is that Crowley ran essentially a satanic cult for members of the bourgeoisie, that he was a British intelligence asset, that he was that his advice and guidance on running cults was used by British and US intelligence to build various cult-like organizations for decades afterwards. So Satanism isn't just some stupid thing that is indulged in by like hooded idiots on certain nights of the year. Along with other strange fascistic beliefs, it's a part of ruling class organization. This doesn't mean that there's a devil with a forked tail stalking the streets out there, but what you find when you look into the actual beliefs of the bourgeoisie is that more and more it comes down to like strange, like fascistic things, bizarre, like cult-like religions, including Satanism. So this is part of the plethora of like bourgeois belief systems, which again, to go back to the Epstein thing, is used as a method of binding the bourgeoisie together, particularly if they've been engaged in like murder, rape, or other like horrific criminal activity together, which Satanist cults provide a way of doing. And if you look at some of the members of the bourgeoisie, like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, well, you could really see them getting on board with the Church of Satan type thing. So yes, to answer Metal Nick's Metal Nick's question in the chat, yeah, Crowley was a British intelligence asset. Crowley advised on the interrogation of Rudolf Hess. If you're not familiar with Rudolf Hess, he was the again, like a lover of Satanism and the occult and magic, and also, by the way, apparently a paedophile who was Hitler's deputy. And he parachuted into Scotland and was held actually not far from where I am now in Glasgow for a while, before he was brought in by British intelligence to be interrogated. Now, the precise reasons for Rudolf Hess's flight to Perfidious Albion are still unknown. Well, they're known to some people, but they're not telling the rest of us anytime soon. There was a book I read many years ago that claimed the whole thing was a giant confidence trick performed basically by the SIS, British intelligence, and that they tricked Hess into thinking he was flying in to negotiate peace, and then they grabbed him up and held him prisoner. Now, that could possibly be true. There are the involvement of Aleister Crowley, though, tends to sort of make me question exactly what was going on there. Crowley apparently offered to interrogate Hess due to the fact that they were both lovers of black magic. Now, the book I read denied that Crowley ever interrogated Hess. He just advised on things. Who knows what the actual truth about that is, though. So this sort of digression into discussing Satanism is to look at like just how bizarre a collection of beliefs the bourgeoisie really have, and just how weird their stuff is. So this is when you get back to when you get back to looking at like why they promote such things, why such things are promoted to like troubled teens on the internet, is because groups of like fascists out there have been into this kind of stuff for many, many generations. Like you look at the sheer amount of occult bullshit that the Nazis used to be into. Again, these are things which are used to as tools for socialization and control. That's what this is all about, ultimately. And ultimately also that it appeals to alienated youth in particular who can be recruited to do certain things, like shoot up a school. Why is shooting up a school potentially useful for the ruling class? Well, I would say that it has a utility to the ruling class in the sense that it creates a permanent atmosphere of fear and insecurity, particularly amongst young people from the earliest possible age. And if that's what, and by creating that, what you're doing is you're bringing people up in a world where they are constantly afraid, constantly on edge, and of course constantly demanding more securitization, demanding more, not just security in schools, but be constantly looking over their shoulders, constantly afraid that some lunatic with a gun is going to come out of the shadows and kill them. So if you wanted to create two generations who are basically fucked up completely, thanks to living in fear of a school shooting, well, then you have achieved that. Because the tendency amongst Western Marxists is to say, oh, it's just a question of alienation and mental health. Well, there is that. Those are elements. There are elements of that to it, or that the US is a particularly sick society. Well, it is. But again, it takes an awful lot to pick up a gun and go and kill a bunch of children. It takes a very certain degree of madness and psychopathic tendencies to go and do that. And who's to say that some of these people haven't been helped along the way to do that? Certainly, that the more you examine it, the more I come to believe that this is something that has gone on. I'm going to look further into this and see if we can't get guests on. But to conclude the point, it's no surprise that now you have a bunch of like self-identified trans people doing the shootings, because it is from like the outcast types. There's the self-declared outcasts a lot of the time that these school shooters are often recruited. Like 25 to 30 years ago, it was like goth types that were the school shooters. Now it's like the trans brigade. And also it shows us all, that the deleterious impact that like the puberty blockers and stuff like that can have on some people. The fact that this guy Rutzler was on a cocktail of drugs from the age of 12 probably didn't help his mental condition either. And so it's always important to be very clear upon these things. I see there was a discussion as to what the exact position of that the Marxist-Leninists should take on the gender ideology question. I believe that still the best exploration of and response to the gender ideology question was done by the CPG-BML several years ago in response to an attempt by a bunch of pro-trans nutcases to include completely unscientific gender ideology influenced positions in the party's program. Thankfully, that was defeated. But it did lead to a series of pamphlets being produced which comprehensively exposed gender ideology as anti-Marxist, anti-materialist, idealist crap, which needs to be rejected. And if you can't reject it, then, and if you refuse to reject it, then basically what I would argue is you've succumbed to opportunism for the purposes of gaining more recruits. But the recruits you'll be gaining will be unstable individuals anyway, who if they fanatically hold true to this form of idealism. So what real value do you get by pandering to these people? My argument would be absolutely nothing. Right. Anti-Matt TV says, I'm very suspicious that there were mass shootings just the time to distract from the Epstein files, thanks to yourself and Decline and Fall show, some connection between lumpen criminals and the state. Yeah. No, that's certainly true. I mean, the lumpen criminal elements and the state collaborate all the time. And I think that the work of Aaron Good has shown that very comprehensively. And the work of Peter Dale Scott. No Shady 2 says, Hess flew to the UK for negotiations with Churchill against Hitler's intentions, as per Soviet docs. That's one of the things that I've heard, certainly. Frank to Togstad says, I love that you have a hoodie in the background. Yes, hanging on the back of the door. Arcane Eclectic says, Himmler was deeply into the occult and paganism. He modeled the SAS and the Knights of the Teutonic Order. Yeah, he had a round table. And again, like, Himmler's this fucking gimpy little dude. But he saw himself as like King Arthur or something. It's ridiculous shit. But this is the kind of stuff that they were into. This is the kind of stuff that like brings people in and socializes them into fascist organizations. Because if fascist organizations just said, we're here to have you serve as a paramilitary arm of BlackRock, then nobody would join, would they? But it's always got to be, no, we're defending Western civilization. We're the Knights of the Round Table. We are riding off to battle against the orcs and stuff like that. That kind of stuff appeals to people, certain people, you know. being a paramilitary for BlackRock doesn't. Okay, just going through some more comments here. Lee Argent said it's a societal problem, not an individualistic problem. Well, one doesn't contradict the other. The individual is part of society, and society is reflected back into the individual. So yes, the society that we live in creates us. That's certainly true. But to say that it's all about just the individual. It's just society. Well, the individual interacts with social structures constantly. So we're all born into a sick society, but not all of us become school shooters. That's the thing. So you have to make a decision. You have to analyze this properly and say, well, you have to analyze it dialectically to understand, how does a certain individual become that psychotic? What level of intervention what level of degradation was required to basically turn off every social impulse? It's an interesting question. Sophia says, no matter how many of these insane shootings I live through in the US, I'll never get used to it. Well, you shouldn't get used to it because it's a horrific thing. And it says that the US imperialism as the center of the empire has produced something which is profoundly sick. But then again, you have to analyze and understand these things. Okay, so Thatcher said there's no such thing as society. Well, Thatcher was wrong. She's nowhere near as clever and profound as her admirers think that she was. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to an hour tonight. So I hope you've enjoyed this stream. I'll be back with you again tomorrow for more. And we've got more specials coming up. Now I'm back to more of a regular streaming pattern. So be sure to tune in tomorrow. That'll be a 7 p.m. show tomorrow. So join me for that. Be sure to subscribe to all the different platforms. Thanks to over 500 of you who have joined tonight. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. And it remains for me to say thank you for listening and viewing. And I'll be back with you again